Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the BizBlend podcast, where bold ideas, curious minds, and sharp business thinking come together for some seriously real talk. I'm your host, Sana, and today, listeners, we are hitting the slopes, metaphorically speaking. Our guest, Dominic Levesque, is no stranger to high stakes terrain, whether it's on a snowboard cutting through powder or navigating the steep inclines of organizational transformation. He's the CEO and co founder of Next Wave, an HR visionary, and the author of the newly released book, Avoiding Avalanches and Big Mountain Adventures, which is a field guide for leaders trying to survive and thrive through business change. Well, listeners, this conversation isn't just for the executives in corner offices. It is for founders, entrepreneurs, change agents, and honestly, anyone who's ever looked at a metaphorical mountain and asked, how the hell do I climb that without triggering a disaster? So, buckle in. We are going to explore frameworks, challenge assumptions, and maybe even uncover the blind spots that could trigger the next avalanche in your business journey. So, with that, Dominique, welcome to the show. And I'm really, really excited for our conversation today.
Hi, Sana. Great to be here. Look forward to the conversation.
Definitely, definitely. Okay, Dominic. Before we talk about your book, let's deep dive into a bit of your journey. So what actually motivated to write this book? I mean, how did you connect or draw parallel between an avalanche, the mountain, and then the business, the challenges, and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if I go back a bit, and I think give you a quick life story, and I think all the pieces will connect. Is I was a young kid from Quebec City in Canada. I grew up playing a lot of sports. Right, I've always been in sports. I played every sports I could find, pretty much, mostly hockey. Of course, I'm Canadian. That's obvious.
Yeah.
And then when I realized I wouldn't play professional hockey, I did something that I thought was much smarter, which I played in a punk rock band. So I started the band and I did a lot of music and
Wow.
touring, and I was always into creating, writing, writing songs, sharing with the
Mm.
world. Right, that was me growing up.
Wow.
So yeah, and then of course, with my music career, we realized that we would never get famous with that. I actually found a real job. I needed to find the real jobs, which I did in 2006. I started my career in the HR field as a recruiter, and I stayed in the same company for 18 years, from
Wow.
2026 to 2020, to 2006 to 2024.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was such a great career in a very large, the largest multinational in the HR field in the world. I grew up
Mhm.
amongst the ranks. I became president of lines of business in Canada. I became one of the two group presidents in Canada, and then I was a president. They asked me to come to the U.S. after that, and then I went to the U.S. And then I worked 3.5 years almost in the U.S. as a line of business president for two of their lines of business down there. And
Mm.
I was always that kid, right? So that creative kid who liked to break things and build them back up and build them better and new, right? Create new ways, find new ways of doing things. So I always liked to write about it, right? So what I did is, while I was there, I wrote my first book, which was the Wave model that you can also find on Amazon. And then I always wanted to write a second book. And through the years, what I did in my work journey is I transformed companies, right? Taking over new businesses, doing a deep dive. So with time, and helping companies do the same. So with time, I created a model that I used every time I took over a new line of business. I worked with a new customer, and that model got created, which is the AB model, which was at the foundation of Avoiding Avalanche. So if I and bringing up the here is, after 18 years, I decided I wanted to do stuff on my own. So I decided to resign that company, took a few months off, to write and finalize the writing of that book, which I released at the end of 2024, which is already a bestseller in the US on Amazon, which I'm really proud of. And it's been really fun, right? Sharing and doing all of that. And why the mountain is, if I go back to the sports, is I also run a snowboard company. That's one of my passions. Snowboard is a passion, backcountry is a passion. So I've always liked to do this, and that was always what I wanted to do.
Wow. That's, I mean, very, very interesting journey, Dominic. I mean, um, creativity, then, uh, you know, being a part of a multinational company for 18 years, that's almost 2 decades. I mean, there is a myriad of experiences and observations. I mean, that's very, very interesting journey, Dominic. I mean, I really love that. Um, so, talking about your book, um, in your book, you mentioned, I mean, you kind of compared business transformations to big mountain adventures, which I absolutely can connect with. So, what makes this analogy more than just a catchy metaphor?
Oh, that's a great question. And by the way, I love to explain this because every time I say it, I keep it. I like to keep things relatively simple. If you read the book, you'll see the
Yeah.
concepts are really simple. But
Okay.
the way I always thought about this is, if you read all the books and if you read all the stories and you listen to all the stories of backcountry stories and big mountain climbers, it needs a lot of preparation to do this. And all the people, and there's so many stories of people who actually died through that
Mhm.
through that process.
Yep.
Some of them were prepared and some of them weren't prepared enough. But I always say this: if you leave for a big mountain backcountry adventure without the right equipment, the right team, the right preparation, the right mindset, the right health, everything needs to be right before you leave for a big mountain adventure. Otherwise, you might very well die. The analogy works the same for business. If you leave for a business transformation and you don't have the right team, the right equipment, it's not the right time, you don't have the right commitment from executive, competitive landscape, you don't right, the conditions aren't right, you might very well kill your business. And it's the same thing. So the first 4 chapters of the book are actually talking about this. How do you decide when to go, and what do you need to do before you actually go? Because going is probably the most important decision you're going to make, both in big mountain adventures backcountry or in big organization transformations.
Mm. I mean, that is so, so right, Dominic. And uh, the one thing I would also like to add here is there's a lot of risk taking. When we imagine about the mountain climbers. I was watching the other day a documentary on Nepali Sherpa who climbed 14 peaks, the world's highest 14 peaks. Um, and there was one specific peak, I think it was K2 or something, where statistically, if you look at the numbers, um, more and more climbers have actually died because it's a very, straight slope. It cannot be climbed easily. So most of the climbers during when he was there, they weren't ready because uh, if they looked at the data and the statistics and they decided no, I mean there are more chances of dying than climbing. But then also he took a very calculated risk. It was more about the grit and his mindset. The one word that he specified, that what made him to take the risk is mindset, and of course there was a lot of preparation. So there are so many parallels which can be drawn, and I love that, how you connected with this metaphor, this picture.
Yeah. And I think you said it best, right? So there's every time you leave for either a big adventure in the mountain or for a big transformation, it's
Mhm.
all about assessing the risk,
Mm.
understanding the environment, making
Mm.
sure you're well prepared, and there's it's never 100%, right? If you wait to be 100% ready, like there's always a certain level of risk that you have to take. Sometimes the risk is worth it, sometimes the risk isn't, and then that's a decision you need to make. And that's what I talk about when in the model, when I speak about know before you go, right? These are the things you need to be really, really sure you know, and you have assessed that level of risk before you actually decide to embark in a journey of big mountain climbing or just a business transformation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And um, now, you're talking about your frameworks, the wave model, and then the new avalanche framework. Uh, I'm curious to know, Dominique, that is it realistic for organizations, especially in today's day and age, to adopt frameworks when people um, inside they may feel burnout, they may feel skeptical, especially considering today's, whatever the trends are there regarding layoffs and restructuring and stuff, or simply who are resistant to change, because right now changes are happening, month by month, like month on month we are seeing rapid changes logically, or from the human side processes and all.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. Yeah, so most definitely it is realistic. But what you have to do, and that's one of the things I find about big consulting companies, like they are, some of them are exceptional. They have built models, but
Mm.
they can be overwhelming, right? The models are complex, 50 pages reports with complex implementation, and then they implement the process with you for many years, and it's very intense and very it's often very costly as well, but it's also the models are very complex. One of the things I always try to do is keep the models very simple, right? So there has to be a certain level of simplicity so a kid can understand what you're doing. I always say the same thing. If a 5-year-old kid cannot understand what you're trying to say, it's probably not clear enough. So that's why I try to keep things very clear, very simple. And I've done this multiple times, and I'm doing this with my new company now. We just transformed a small staffing healthcare business into a professional HR services and recruitment firm in Canada. We're scaling extremely fast, and I'm using, of course, my own model to do this, and I'm using all the steps of that model with Next Wave as we're building that beautiful project. But if you think about, you're right. That's why the landscape is changing. The world is changing fast. Everything is changing in front of us. That's forcing companies to change because the biggest risk often is not to change. If you don't do anything, then competitors are going to eat your pie. Then somebody's gonna come in to disrupt your business. So that's why companies need to continue to evolve and transform, but it's also not a straight line. And I talk about this quite a bit in my book, but also to every teams I've worked with. It's all about collaborations. It's all about partnership. It's all about transparency, but it's all about as well course correcting in the process. Because if you continue with that straight line, you will probably fail. So that's why there is going to be ups and downs. There's going to be shift. There's going to be things you got to correct in the process always.
Totally, totally. That makes sense. Um, and Dominic, now moving on to a bit of a personal, kind of reflection. Since you have been into multiple fields, I mean, especially in creativity, you have been an athlete, musician, now a CEO. Um, what personal failure or, quote unquote, avalanche moment taught you the most about resilience in leadership? I mean, any anecdote or moment or even that you would like to share with us?
Oh my God. And by the way, thank you for the question, because one of the things I always tell when I give conferences or I speak in podcasts is, as leaders through our careers, we learn a lot more from failures than from successes, right? So, because failures is what teaches you how to move forward, it teaches you resilience. So, I've had a bunch of failures in my career, right? So, and we're not, and nobody is is protected from more failures, right? I will fail again, and it's okay, right? As long as you learn from them, you correct them, and make sure that you control the failures to a level that doesn't kill you, right? And if you just think back about the financial crisis in North America, 2008 to 2009, big financial crisis. I was a new leader. I had never experienced it managing teams in a crisis. Of course, the results were rough. Our mind, like the culture of our teams was rough. We had to make really difficult decisions and layoffs and letting go people and performance management and micromanagement. It was very, very hard at some point to be a leader in those times, right? And then you gotta learn to lead through those times through keeping your people together. I would say when COVID happened, right? Like that was another huge crisis that we also had to make decisions. But in that time, I personally made way better decisions and managed that crisis a million times better than I had managed the previous crisis for my teams, right? So through these downturns, we learned. And then, of course, COVID was a really difficult moment for humanity. It was a really, really difficult moment for businesses. But if we looked at the way we led our teams and were creative, that we learned that from the previous two crises that we had to manage, right? Yeah, and in personal life, I remember so many moments from my hockey days where you don't make the team you hope to make. You get cut from the team. You don't. Your coach chooses. I was a goalie, and then your coach decides to put in the net the other guy because he thinks he's better, and then your team ends up losing. And there's a lot of failure and frustration and learning how to play with teams, how to depend on others. Of course, in the music business, same thing, right? At some point, we were really popular in Quebec in the grand scheme of things, but ultimately, we were still very small, right? We were a small band, and we realized that we were not good enough to make our lives with that. So that's what happened, right? So it's unfortunate, but it's part of life.
That is true. That is true. I mean, I would be so thankful and lucky that, I would love to have so many experiences, especially in terms of being a part of team, um, being creatively involved in so many things and trying to, be a team player. I mean, so many lessons, so many insights to extract. So that's really, really such an interesting, as I mentioned in the beginning, journey. Um, and Dominic, one aspect that I would like to bring in here, especially when we talk about, startups, fast growth startups, or rapidly scaling organizations that um, sometimes reacting quickly, it's often glorified that you have to quickly react to some kind of negative marketing or some sudden change, policy change or something like that. And your book emphasizes prevention over reaction. So what do you think, isn't some of that risk taking necessary, or everything can be prevented with the right mechanisms and processes?
I wouldn't say everything can be prevented, but a right process will actually help you limit the risk, right? They limit those changes, right? So where nobody is protected from making a bad decision or trying something that doesn't work, right? The mindset of failing fast through that process. But one of the things that's really important in prevention is making sure you ask enough questions. And I cannot reinforce this enough, but the business world is about and it is about the fact that knowledge is power, right? The more you know, the better decisions you make. So I often speak about the old Toyota model with the five W's, right? The why, right? So if you understand that,
Hmm.
through those questionings and through those moments of learning, this is where you're really going to understand your environment and make the best decisions. So it's about, and if you go in the book, going back to this on chapter 5, we call this the Everest of chapter, but it's all about the A of the A to B model, which is who you are today, and the assessing the right, all the aspects of your actual reality. And that's really, really critical, is making sure that to prevent as much risk as possible or as many bad decisions as possible, it's about getting the most level or the most accurate level of information so you can make those decisions accurately with the least amount of risk.
Wow. I really love the name of the chapter. Yeah. Great. And before we wrap up, Dominic, so this one is a bit of a tricky one. In your view, who's ultimately responsible for the, of course, metaphorical avalanche in failed business transformations? Is it the leader who sets the vision, or the people, or the culture that resists it?
Yeah, so it depends the way you look at it, right? So I would divide the questions in pieces. Ultimately, a transformation is the responsibility of the CEO. Always, right? The CEO has to own it. They're responsible to protect the business and for the sustainability of the business. But the only way a transformation will work is if
Mhm.
your culture is right, right? It's all about the people. Yes, you can be a SaaS company, but there's always people underneath everything you do. That's at the essence. So, vision, culture, people are critical for any business innovation, transformation, or business sustainability. And I think that will remain ultimately. So yes, the CEO has to make the calls and the decisions, and his head is on the or her head is on the chopping block. But one of the things that's important is none of that will happen if you don't have the right culture, the right people, and the right environment and vision. Of course, you need any model, right? There's many diff transformation model. Of course, I believe my model is the best, but if you doesn't matter the model you use, if your culture isn't right and your people aren't right, you're not going to make it. So it has to start with the people.
Totally, totally, no doubt. I mean, there's no nuance in here.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So, Dominic, if our listeners they would like to connect with you and also get access to the frameworks and your latest book as well, what would be the best way?
Yeah, it's super easy. Dominic Levesque. If you find my books on Amazon, in the US and Canada, on all the platforms around the world, so you can get access to my book. So please give me a little help here. We're doing really well with the book so far, but it's great. Any push can help. If anybody wants to connect with me personally, wants to reach out, my LinkedIn page, Dominic Levesque, at Solution Next Wave Solutions, super easy to find. Connect with me, send me a message. I'll reply back. Just say, refer to the podcast, and I'd be very happy to speak to your listeners, to our viewers. And then of course, all the social media platforms. So you connect with me on Instagram, Dom Levesque, same thing on Facebook. So I'd be happy to connect.
Awesome. I'll make sure to have all the links in the show notes, Dominic. And thank you. Thank you for this powerful but grounded conversation. Um, what I love about your work is, and this book as well, that it kind of doesn't pretend business is a blue sky hike. It's definitely risky, steep, unpredictable, like all the mountains and the peaks, but it's beautiful. It is beautiful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and if I can end with this, business is fun, right? So all of this, despite the challenges, despite the risk, I always say this: it has to be fun. What you do has to be engaging, has to be fun because that's how we make it. We make it meaningful. So let's
Yeah.
keep businesses fun. Let's keep businesses running, and let's have fun doing it.
Lovely, lovely. So, to all the listeners out there, go and check out Dominique's book, Avoiding Avalanches and Big Mountain Adventures. It's more than just a business book, it's a wake up call for leaders who want to scale smart, lead boldly, and avoid disasters they could have prevented. Check the show notes along with this episode on your favorite podcast platform for the links and connect with Dominique. because the future of business isn't just about surviving the terrain, it's about learning to read it. Until next time, keep blending the bold with the wise. This is Sana signing off from BizBlend. Thank you.